All right, where was it? Where were we? This. So we were looking at the used range and the the value of the range and so on. And I think the last thing I got to was looking at the count of the number of rows in a used range, for example. And if you wanted to pull, certain rows or certain columns. So the beauty of this is, I guess, at this point now, the Excel spreadsheet kind of looks like an APL array. It's got rows and columns. You can index into the rows and columns. You can change them and so on. Just there's a bit of a hierarchy to get to it, sort of. I mentioned that this when you get back the contents of a set of information, and my computer for some reason shut itself down, so I got to reset all this up again. So let's just set this up. W1 Excel.workbooks. And the other thing, by the way, Rob, I forgot to mention is that back in version 10, you can't use this square bracket indexing for collection objects. Yeah, you have to do something like this: sheets.item space 1, and then put that in brackets dot used range, etc. You have to. That's the old way.
I just tried it out with item. I'm used to item 1 as well.
Yeah.
But now you have to, if you have to use the item property, you need to use brackets as well.
Yeah. I think it'll still work. Actually, yeah. And it might depend on the setting of quad WX. Sheets 1 dot used range. Yeah, so there's the contents of our spreadsheet, and I mentioned that you get back these nulls. So the question you might want to ask yourself is this: where are these nulls? So you can do a statement like this one. Do an each a match on the system function quad null or value quad null with each value of this. If I call that whole thing M as a matrix. So let's say M gets that, and then say M match okay, what's wrong here? Suddenly I can't type match anymore. So that gives you a Boolean result, which points out where the nulls are. So then you could do some simple Boolean logic to get rid of those completely null rows and so on. It's one technique. Now let's go the other way. Writing out to the spreadsheet is the next step. Obviously, we've learned how to read from it, but now we want to put some values into it. We might want to do that. So it's kind of the reverse, except what you're doing is you're specifying a certain sheet, range, etc. And now you're going to modify the value to property by simply reassigning it. In this case, I'm simply going to do a 5x5 reshape of the numbers 1 through 25. So let's try that and see what happens. Let me just cut and paste that, I guess, to save some time here. Okay, and I don't happen to have the spreadsheet visible, so I've got to make it visible. Excel.visible. So what used to be, now it's kind of formatted funny, but what used to be employee name and date or something like that is now the numbers 1 through 25. Here's 1. But as I said, what Excel stores and what it shows you are two different things. So it thinks everything in this column is a date. So you give it the number 1, and it thinks that is date 0101 of 1900. So it formats it like that, and that's what you see. The value 2 is formatted as 2, but you can see it's slightly enlarged and it's bold. So those are a couple of properties that Excel has changed there as well, or had already set for that cell. 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. These happen to be bold. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have filled that top left corner with the numbers 1 through 25 as integers to us in APL, but in Excel they look different in some cases. So that is something you need to be aware of. You may want to make sure, as a programmer, you want to make sure that the number format, say, for that column is correct, as far as you're concerned, as far as you want your user to see, right? So you may want it to, in fact, be integer or decimal or what have you. We'll see how you do that. Now, where are we? What if we, now I gave it a matrix, 5 by 5 reshape of IOA 25. So it somehow, as you could see, it translated the concept of an APL array, two-dimensional APL array, into a two-dimensional array over on the Excel site. What if I, in fact, give it a vector? Let's see what happens there. So I'm just going to get rid of the 5, 5 reshape here. Go back to Excel and look at that. Looking at the wrong spreadsheet here. Okay, well, Excel did not quite handle that quite as well. It filled cell row 1 with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then what happened to 6, 7, 8? It didn't quite use those. It just sort of reused 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again 5 times. So that's kind of sad. It's not very useful from our point of view as a two-dimensional array thinking type of persons. So the bottom line is Excel just cannot take a vector and somehow translate that into rows and columns. You have to give it a matrix in order to get a matrix on the other side. So that's a simple lesson there. Okay. This is really magical. If you simply give it a single value, what does it do? Well, as I mentioned in the notes already there, it does scalar extension. That's what we call that in APL. When you fill an array with one single value, over in Excel it does exactly the same thing. That could be useful. You want to initialize a whole set of dates or something like that. You just need one value. Okay. So that's that's in a nutshell how you write to Excel. And we've read from it, we've written to it, and now finally we saw this a little bit already. We want to invoke methods to actually manipulate the spreadsheet in terms of opening it, saving it, closing it, and so on. So you may want to start afresh. You want to create a totally new worksheet, new workbook, a new spreadsheet altogether. So the way we do that. Well, let's look at this thing called method list first of all. So Excel.work. What are the methods of the workbook's collection object? There are not too many. You can add a workbook. You can close a workbook or open a workbook. And then there's a couple of others that are more exotic. Really, all you need to know is add, open, and close. So suppose I wanted to totally start from scratch and create a new workbook. Well, that is simply this: add, followed by the, I guess it's the number of workbooks you want to add. So I just want to add one. So WB3 gets Excel.work add. Okay, that will have created a new workbook. And there it is. It's totally empty. It doesn't even have a name yet. It's simply called Microsoft Excel-Sheet 1. It's only got one worksheet. That's interesting because if you know, when you open Excel, typically you get 3 worksheets, but in our world from APL, when we're calling that particular, maybe that's what the one is, in fact, now that I think about it. Yeah. Is that what the argument is?
I tried with a blank text string. That gave you one with 3 sheets.
One.
Instead of you writing add and one, then
Yeah.
blank text string.
And what does that give you?
And put 1 and then 3 sheets.
Oh, really?
This one
Okay.
is done.
Right. So that gives you the default, in other words, the 3 sheets. Yeah. All right. So that's good to know. I didn't. I don't use this stuff every day. I have to play with it myself to figure out what all the details of it are. But yeah.
I
So
just
we're adding.
tried it a couple of minutes ago. So
Good.
that's
Good.
fine.
Oh, that's good. You were working ahead. Great. So yeah, now that you've got this new workbook, you can populate it as I do in the notes here again. WB3 sheets 1 range value 2 etc. So I won't bother doing that because we just saw that earlier. However, one thing you might query, you might wonder is, okay, where did it create that workbook, or where if I'm going to save that workbook, where is it going to save it on my hard drive, right, or network? And so you can query at least a bit with that. You can say wb3.path. Right now that comes up as blank. There's another property here that you can. Well, what we can do then is go ahead and save that. I'm gonna invoke another. This is a method then of the workbooks object, I guess. Save as. And the argument is a file name, at least a file name. I think you can put a path in front of that, C:, whatever. And again, it's enclosed for version 11 upwards. And let's try that and see what happens. And you can see it's listing the methods for me there. So let's say demo 1. And it's taking a minute. Taking a long minute. Maybe it's asking me something on the other side here. Oh, there you go. See? So sometimes this happens if demo 1 already exists in this location, whatever that location is, you'll get this message come up. And if you're sitting in APL as a programmer, you don't see that message.
There's no way to suppress this?
Well, don't use the same name for starters, or you could query the folder that you're about to send it to and make sure that name doesn't exist.
But I mean, in general.
Yeah, in general, there might be. I don't know off the top of my head if there is, but sometimes yes, you can set a flag of a property that says ignore that dialog box or ignore that issue.
So this particular, but it's not possible to get this back as a callback rather than show this message problem. If you want to do all this stuff invisible for some reason.
Yeah. No, I think in this case, I don't think it's you can do it as a callback type of handling. You would have to query or set a flag that says ignore this, answer yes to this. I believe that's how it works. That's
For each possible.
there's something called the saved property, I believe.
Would this generate like an exception or something, or no? Can that be viewed as like an exception?
Let me just save that and get it out of my face here. There is wb3.save. Do it? Is it? Yeah, there's something called the saved property, and if you set it to 1, it means that you're telling Excel that the spreadsheet has been saved, and therefore it doesn't need to question you if you want to save it or not when it comes time to save it. You know how Excel, you make a change and it says, do you want to save that now? That's one way.
Yeah.
It's similar, but not quite the same problem. it's one way to tell Excel in advance, don't even ask me that question. I'm telling you the answer to that question already. And
Isn't it a dirty bit? So if you type something into the spreadsheet,
Yeah, that's what that
it would say it's 0, and
Yeah.
you can say 1 to
yeah.
Yeah, cheap.
So this is not the same problem as a name that already exists. That's another problem. But there might be a similar property that I'm not aware of to do that. That's how you typically would program it, I think. Or maybe there is a method somehow that gets around this, or a callback. I'm not sure. I would typically just query the folder and make sure, I would query it in APL, look at the list of items in the folder already, file names in the folder, look for that name and say, well, look, that folder, that name already exists. Can you pick it up?
Yeah, of course, but if you could do something in general, if you run this in a batch environment, you don't want to see any user interaction at all.
Exactly,
You just
yeah.
want to
Just pick a new name, yeah. All right, so now that I've done that, let me just go back and run this here, see if this is any different, wv3.path. Okay, so there you go. So now that I have actually saved that worksheet from APL can now see where the path is. And the default is, documents and settings, my documents, according to the signed on user or whatever. So that's the default, but you can change that as a property, and then you can save to a different folder that way.
What would happen if you had set that saved property before where the path was empty? You set it to
Yes,
1 and then just save.
I may have confused you about that. The saved property is what? It's all about the close issue. If I didn't do this, if I didn't do save as, if I just created a workbook and then added something to it and then did a close, Excel would ask me if I really want to close it, if I really want to save it, pardon me, before I close it.
Okay.
And if you set the saved property to 1, it doesn't ask you that question anymore. It just closes the worksheet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the argument to the argument basically to the close function, the close method, is 0 if you don't want to save the changes, and 1 if you do. So you've made some changes, and typically you would want to save them, so the argument would typically be 1. But Excel will ask you that question. That dialog will come up unless you put the saved property to 1. So we'll see some examples of that in Dyalog. APL provides some simple utilities that do exactly that for you. We'll see that soon. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the finer details here. I've sort of hinted about some of this already. Data types and formatting. In APL, we have character data and numeric data, and then within numeric data we have integer, Boolean, floating point, and that's about it, right? In Excel you have quite a few other possibilities. You've got Boolean, date, time is a data type, double is a data type, error is a data type, integer is a data type, long, string, currency, and variant. And I think there might be others, and it depends, and that's just Excel. And then you get into other objects and they have other data types. So sometimes it's not a one-to-one translation. A date in Excel is not necessarily a integer or a floating point. It's, you got to sometimes figure out the translation between data types. Sometimes it's easy. Boolean is Boolean in both, and integer is integer in both, but it's not always the case. So just be aware of that you might have to deal with data type. And we've seen this as well. Quad null is what APL uses to fill in the blanks when you've got blank cells in a spreadsheet. Here's the breakdown of this value versus value 2. Those were 2 of the key properties I mentioned. And so value 2 is like value. It used to be back when this first started, there was only value, and then I think later they added something called value 2. So value it says doesn't have currency, or value 2 I guess doesn't have currency and data types as an option. And you can go to this link on the web and read a lot more about that. The bottom line as an APO programmer is you really don't care, you just use the word value 2. Okay. I do anyway. And in fact, it seems that in versions of APL beyond version 10, the word value doesn't even work anymore. You can't even use it as a property. I'm not quite sure why that is. So that's just my experimentation and finding things out. Another useful tool that I have found is this. Excel has built-in functions. And one of the functions, an example of one of those is this thing called isNumber. So you can have a formula and say, is that cell a number, yes or no? And it gives a Boolean result. So from APL, you can actually call that function because it's what we call an exposed method, I guess, from APL's point of view. So here's our object, Excel, calling this method isNumber. And the argument is the used range of the spreadsheet. So that will give you back a Boolean result in many cases of, let's just see if it works or not. I don't think I've tried it for a while, so bear with me here. Yeah, that works. It gives you back a little bit more. It actually gives you a 2-cell object. I'm not quite sure why it gives me this. Maybe I didn't need the word used range, I'm not sure, but you can see that the used range is a certain number of rows and columns, and only these ones in the top left corner are numbers according to whatever this isNumber function defines as a number. You'd have to look that up in Excel's help to figure that out. And there are quite a few other is functions. Is error, is formula, is null, is not NA or something. Is NA is another one. There's about 6 or 7 of these is functions that you might want to tinker with when you're examining a spreadsheet from APL's point of view. So that's kind of handy. Formula versus value. Okay, so yeah, we can also look at the formula property of a used range. For example, I don't think we have any formulas in the spreadsheet right now. Well, let's look at our demo. Let's change this to 3. Bunch of terrorist names. This one. Yeah, the thing is, some of those might be formulas. I don't think any of them are, but you can say formula instead of value 2. And generally, I guess if a cell is not a formula, you just get back the value. But if I were to go over to the spreadsheet itself and enter a formula, so I might say cell E here is equal to cell A1 plus B1 plus B1. Probably a lousy example. Let's do B1 plus C1 plus B1. Okay, now it's formatted as a date, so I'm stuck with that.
Just add on a new row, for example.
There, that's better. Okay, so this in fact is this cell D1 is no longer just a simple value, it's a formula, right? So let's go back to APL and see what that now returns for us. So if I ask for the value, I get the value according to the expression of the formula. If I ask for the formula, I actually get back the formula, the actual string that I entered. So that could be useful, again, if you're just trying to determine where the formulas exist on a spreadsheet. You can figure them out that way, I suppose.
Is this formula?
Yeah, there is an is formula function, you're right. Let's try that. I think there is, maybe. It's funny, these is functions, they somehow, I don't know how it works, but somehow they're just not always available or exposed, as they say, to APL. In my case, it doesn't seem to be working right now. I'm not sure why. But yeah, I believe there is such a format, such a thing, and I don't know how you
Is
make
it
it work.
Excel or is it in workbooks?
No, I don't know, and it would take a while to figure it out, probably. Yeah, it's a vague thing. I'm just not familiar enough with these things. I don't play around with them enough to know exactly how they work. But you try yours, and you may different versions of Windows and Excel and so on may differ. Is what I find. Okay, forget the second last point there about APL win. What happens, you might ask yourself, what happens when you underfill the results of you specify a certain range, D5 to D15 rather to F17, so that's D, E, F, so that's 3 rows and 15, 16, 73 columns. But I'm actually only specifying 2 rows and 2 columns. What happens there? Well, similar to, not quite similar, but similar to that vector case, Excel does something different with that. So I guess let me just try that and see what happens for you. From APL. To workbook 1, which I think in fact is common again. So here's what it did. It actually did fill in the first 2 rows and columns, but it sort of also filled in 3 rows and 3 columns, because that in fact was the size of the range I asked for, but it didn't have enough data to fill those, so it put in what Excel calls an NA, and it represents that as $n/A. And there is an is NA function as well, by the way, if you could get it to work, which will tell you what's an NA. It just means it's a null. In other words, it's what Excel's version of a null cell is. It's something's there, but we can't tell what it is, so it's null. Okay, so that's just just be aware of if you underfill something, that's what you get. Okay, moving on. Dates are especially tricky, as we've just seen a glimpse of already. If I go back to that common spreadsheet, in fact, these numbers here, this column here, are formatted as dates. But in fact, if I were to look at the values in them, you may know that you can go into Excel and you can highlight a particular range, and then you can say Format Cells. And it may come up as date or number or something, but you can choose date, and then you can change the format to be whatever you like. If I instead ignore that and choose number and choose integer by getting rid of the decimal places, then let's see what happens. It formats, well, those were all 99s, which isn't very useful to us. If you go into Excel and actually enter some dates, let's enter some dates. So 1900, 0101, and 1990, 101, 2009, 1231, and so on. Now you can see that Excel is formatting those dates that I entered as numeric, and I can actually, go back, reverse of what I just did there, and say format those as dates, and it shows you them sort of as I entered them. You could put slashes and so on. But as you can see, what they really are, they are integers, in fact, and it's just a question of how Excel formats them. You could even leave the decimals in if you want, but that's kind of silly. So dates, be aware that what you're looking at in Excel may or may not be valid, what I call valid dates. And I picked one date in particular, and just to see what we would get. I picked 1900-0101 as the first cell, and it gave me, and Excel considers that day 1.
So what if you want to write days before the...
5 days before it. So what, 1890? Doesn't know what to do with that. They couldn't format that as a number. That's interesting. Let's see what happened. I'll leave that. I'll put 1900-11 here, and I'll put 1901-1231 here. Let's try that for just for the sake of interest. Okay, so interestingly, it formatted 1901-1231 as 731. Let's see what we get back here in Excel. So it's workbooks 1, sheets 1, used range, value 2 again. I suppose this will work. Okay, why is that not working now? Pardon me?
I was thinking there's a leap year or something.
I don't know why used range suddenly wasn't working. Okay, well, there you go. It it returns integers almost, except for the top one, which was before 1900. So Excel can't even handle a date before 1900 or 101. It just leaves it as a string.
Perhaps it has formatted as a text in Word.
That's how I typed it in. I typed it in as text, and you saw in the other cases, Excel immediately converted it to a number according
Sometimes
to it.
it auto-formats it. So perhaps it's changed the formatting of it. So if you went back to the properties for that cell, perhaps it has changed it.
Let's see. No, it still says it's a number, but it leaves it with slashes in between. So yeah, what I would say is just can't handle it. It just doesn't know what to do with it. All right, but let's see. Okay, so we got back numbers that look similar to Excel's, 32,874 and 4,000. So you're sitting here in APL. What do you do with those? How do you know what dates those are? Well, it turns out that there are some utilities, if you're not aware of them already, in Dyalog APL. I'm just going to redo this here. N/util, I believe, is the workspace. If I just copy that in, you get a few functions here. One of them is TSSM. I think it's this one, 32874. Yeah, that function. You give that function a day count. I call it day count. It's the count of days since 1901, and it gives you back a year, month, day. And the opposite to that is SM_TS. You give it a year, month, day, such as today's. Well, let's pick. I think I entered 2009-12/31, and that gives us 40177. I believe I entered the same date in Excel, and Excel shows that as 40178. So here's the problem. Excel does not agree with Dyalog's method of counting days from 1900 or 101. Excel, in fact, thinks that 1900 is a leap year, but it's not. It's always been wrong, and they're sticking to it.
What century?
I think they've decided that everybody's using it wrong, and we're going to keep it that way.
So essentially, it's not a leap year.
Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but 1900 apparently by the official rules
Is
is
this
not.
divisible by 400?
Oh, 400.
Yes,
So, we just have to live with that, and you have to basically add 1 or subtract 1 depending on which way you're going. So that's one of the key factors. But the other thing is this number formatting. We can actually control it from APL. You can, as I do here, query the format. So what I'm doing is I'm setting a range here from A1 to A7, and I'm going to query it and set it and so on. So RNG1 gets WB1.range from A1 to A7. I guess I don't have WB1. Let's see what it is. So RNG1 dot value 2, first of all. And notice, by the way, when my range is a single column, A1 to A7, when I query it with the value 2 property, I in fact get back a 1-column array in APL, so it maintains that structure. It doesn't automatically ravel it into a vector. So I can also query then the number format. What has Excel been using to format those numbers? Well, nothing, in fact. But I can set them. I'm pretty sure I can do that at least. To this, y/mm/db. And if I go back to Excel and look at it, well, sure enough, it has nicely formatted them as year, month, day with slashes. So you can control, to some extent, how things look from APL's point of view. You can even, if you set it to, you'll have to read up on what number format it is in Excel. So hash dot hash means, I guess it's meant to look like a decimal number with 4 decimals. Let's try that. And there weren't any, it's all integers, so you don't actually see any decimal values, but you do see a decimal point. So instead of hash is 00 with a $sign. Let's see what that does. Sure enough, puts it the $, puts nice double dot 00 there. So again, you're creating a report from APL. You've got full control over what the contents look like as well as what they really are. So there's that. Typically, when you install Dyalog APL, if you haven't used that before, there's this, wherever your Dyalog is, there's a subfolder called WS, and then there's a workspace called util that contains that tool, and that tool, and many others for dealing with dates. Okay. The rest of it, I think, is just repeating pretty much what I've said here. We're setting a range. We're filling it with some random numbers. We're setting the number format to day, month, year versus this kind of format and so on. You can probably fool around with that. Here's where we're changing something called the font property, and I guess the sub-property of that, or I'm not sure how to say that. The font object and the size property, so you're enlarging from default perhaps, and you're setting the italic bit to 1, making it italic. Or you can manipulate the color of something called the interior of a cell and so on. There's something called color index, which are preset colors in Windows, or I'm not sure if it's Windows or Excel or both. There are integer numbers that you can use which have preset meanings in terms of color, so you don't have to know RGB, you just would need to know that number. Clear formats is a way of, you've done some formatting from APL, and then you want to just clear all that formatting out and just have raw numbers again, so that's a method that allows you to clear that, whatever those changes are, and back to default. And clear contents is a very handy method if you've actually created some information in a spreadsheet and then you want to clear it out again. You can just call that method. contents. And go back to your spreadsheet, and sure enough, it just wipes out the values from the range you've specified. So that's a handy programming tool as well.
Is there any way to reset, for example, the used range? You could clear everything, and clear the used range, and then reset it to nothing.
Good question. I'm not sure. Let's try it. Let's do.
That could be handy in some cases.
Can you assign this? These ranges in property?
Let's clear the contents of the entire spreadsheet.
The contain value, but sometimes if you user clicked and added the value and then delete it, then it will still be part
It's
of
still
that.
populated, but
So that clears out the whole spreadsheet. But the question is now, what is the used range? What are its boundaries, right? You want to know that.
Yeah.
Well, it still has 7 rows, and it still has probably a few columns. So no, just doing a clear contents doesn't change the used range. I don't know the answer to your question, but there might be a way
is it a
to.
property that you can assign or no?
Probably.
So if you just, I mean, you assign it here, say I want it to be 3-3, would it undo and down?
Is it a property you can assign? I don't. Well, let's try it. Let's see. Let's set the counts. Let's set the column count. I don't think it'll allow you to do this. No.
Oh, oh.
Or are we clear?
That's not just clear.
No, just clear. Used range clear. Clear contents is pretty much the word. Okay, clear. Let's see what that does. Now we're down to 1 column and 1 row. Okay, well that helps.
That's the way.
So yeah, often the answer to your question is yes, there is something out there, but as you saw, when you do a prop list, it's huge, and method list, it's huge. It takes a while to grasp all of the possibilities here. You need to hunt around a bit and play around with Excel quite a bit. Okay, let's look at some packaged utilities that come with APL that do these kinds of things. Well, first, actually, I should just finish off by saying, typically you've done something with a spreadsheet from APO, you then want to close it off cleanly. You know, it's best to make sure if you've opened a spreadsheet that you close it from APL as opposed to going over to Excel and closing it, because you've developed a dialogue, a communication between two processes. You should complete that dialogue normally without one thing suddenly disappearing when the other thing doesn't know about it. So I've got several spreadsheets open here, so I'm going to say Excel.workbooks 1.close, and the argument 0 means close it and don't save the changes. And I think I've got 2 others open as well, so I'm going to do those as well. There's probably, no, wait, okay, I only had 2 maybe. And let's just confirm. Okay, no, there is still 1 open. I don't know what the number is.
It's 1.
Another? I already closed 1.
Is it a 0?
Yeah,
No,
but
it's
then it's this.
4 maybe? No.
I think it was
Yeah, but
one.
if you close 1, then the list only contains 1 less element.
So no, there was 3 in the beginning when you first closed.
Yeah, I had 3 open, but there was 2 number 1s for some reason. That's
Yep.
weird.
No, but not 2 number 1, but you closed the first one, then the other ones moved
Oh,
down
yeah,
to
of
number
course,
2
yeah,
first,
yeah,
now
you're right,
number 1, and
right.
then in the end, it was number
good
3,
point,
it was
yeah.
number 1.
There's a compression or something happening?
Well,
Yeah, you closed one from one end, and then the rest of them moved down.
yeah, they don't have fixed numbers. In other words, they're just the first one or the second one available, basically.
You
Yeah.
just should close them in the other.
Good point. Yeah.
Direction.
Okay, so now at least they're all closed. But then we're not done yet. We haven't actually. What we have not done is we haven't severed the link between APL and Excel yet. There's yet another step. You normally have to do what's called the quit method. So you can see it comes up in my list here, quit. call the quit method of the parent, the overall global parent object, the Excel object. You're going to quit that from APL's point of view. And now it's not even, oh, it is still there. So it doesn't quite die for some reason.
Is it still open in the back corner?
Okay, yeah, sorry, it's quit. Quit is different from actually disappearing. I forgot, there's sort of 3 steps here. Close your worksheets, workbooks, then quit Excel, and then actually erase the object itself. So you can do that with this kind of step, or quad EX. Now those other objects are, those are temporary ones that I created. I suspect if you tried to reference those now, it would fail, because the Excel object, the parent object itself, they were sub-objects of the Excel object. For some reason, the APL still keeps those names handy, but in fact, if you tried to reference those, I think it would fail. So yeah, it says disconnected, whatever that means. Okay, so now we can finally quit. So Excel, as you see, is gone in my taskbar and so on. Okay, I wanted to try that workspace that I mentioned there. So I believe it's stored in a folder like whatever your Dyalog folder is, and then samples / Olay. So you can load that, and that's the folder, and then the actual workspace is Olay Auto. And as it says here, see describe for details. So let's see describe. And it just gives you a little listing of the functions that are available in that workspace. Let's ignore this one and this one and this one for the moment. Excel print is somewhat useful. Excel chart, Excel contents are useful as well. Excel contents and contents 1. So as it says here, the argument is the name of an Excel workbook, and that one's just a shortened version of this one. An Excel print says the argument is a matrix of numbers or character strings. So in other words, this one is for reading the values from Excel into APL, and this Excel print is for writing to Excel. So you've got a couple of utilities here, but they're very rough. You will need to modify those as we will do with some simple examples here. So here's our first one, Excel contents. You can say, what's the shape of Matt gets Excel contents, and then my usual path here, which I don't have loaded here. Let's see what happens here. So you see it's doing something with Excel in the background. Oh, there we got a bug. Like I said, these things are rough. They're so old, they use this value property, but for some reason that now doesn't work in version 12 or version 11. So I need to now go in and edit that, except that it's in a namespace construction now. So I'm going to change value to value 2 right here. Okay, so I'll show you this more in detail later, but let's just do it that way for now. Branch to quote LC, and the shape of Matt is 2, and in fact it's a 2-cell array of shape 7 by 7 and 6 by 2, and if I actually just type it out, you can see that it is the contents of the 2 worksheets side by side, sort of. And we saw one of them already, but now we see the second one. And somehow, I'm not quite sure how they hang together. If I say one pick, that, let's see the first one, and there's the second one, in fact. Okay, so let's look at the logic of that function. Excel contents. And it actually uses, here's our first, it uses a couple of with statements. I don't know if, I don't use those very much myself. Does anybody use colon with? Yeah, okay, good. So you guys are already familiar. So basically it creates a little, it creates a kind of a namespace environment or a sub area on the fly. And you can now, the beauty of using it that way is you can now suddenly see essentially the sub-objects and their properties are suddenly visible. You don't have to fully qualify things with, you know, workbook 1, sheet 1, etc. You can sort of do this kind of logic more elegantly.
It's the same as using CS.
That's right. It's Dyalog's namespace logic that with sort of enters the namespace to do its business. Yeah. So we're familiar with this now, though. We're creating it happens to use the letters EX for the variable name. There's our quad WC. We're creating an OLE client object Excel application again. We are the left argument was an option debug. If I had said 1 as a left argument, it would then turn the visible property. You can't even see that on the screen there, can you? Let me just change my colors here. Highlight it or something there. The visible property is getting set according to whether you supply an argument or not. So if you really want to see it as it happens, you set a 1 as the left argument. And then we enter one of the workbooks, and we actually use a trap here. If there happens to be a domain error because we got the name of it wrong or something, then what we want to do is go down to the end of the trap here. So we call the open method, and the argument is the same as our argument to our main function, but there's the enclose symbol because we have to enclose in this version of the APL. And then we figure out how many sheets we have. Well, it turns out we've got a 4 control structure in Dyalog, which already kind of figures out for you how many things there are in a given collection. So this is really handy. You can say for something called S colon in, and sheets would be the collection object of a workbook, and Dyalog will already figure out how many sheets there are and construct a for loop for you. So that's handy. You don't have to count them anymore. And then it just goes through that loop, and again it simply assigns something called data, which is in fact the result of this function, and it keeps incrementing that to the value, it was value, but I changed it to value 2 of the used range of each sheet in the workbook. And if it can't, if for some reason it can't get the value property, and it's a value error, I'm not sure exactly where that would occur, it gives you back 0, 0, 0, reshape 0. So you're going to get something for a worksheet regardless of what it is. And then here's where we're setting the saved property. It says, as it says right here, prevent Excel from prompting to save the workbook. So there's an instance where Dyalog has given you that. Then we're out of the open with. So now, just by ending that, I think that automatically closes the workbook, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, we don't even have to automatically close the workbook because the with statement essentially opens it. But we do have to set this one little flag so that Excel doesn't prompt us to say, do you want to save any? Even though we didn't write anything to it, I'm not sure why we need to do that, but that seems to be what you need to do. If there had been a domain error somehow, you would get this logic taking place here. End with, so we're corresponding with the opening of the workbook here, so then we're closing that. Then we're finally invoking that Excel.quit method to quit, tell Excel to quit, in fact. And then we're right out of here where we totally get rid of the client object with the end of that with. So it's a nice hierarchical programming tool there to read all the content. So that's why I got back 2 cells, a 2-cell array. First worksheet, second worksheet as separate cells because there's a loop in there that did that for me. Okay, any questions on that? So you obviously could modify that. If you only wanted the first worksheet, you would just get rid of that with loop and you would just address worksheet 1 instead. And so you could easily modify this function, right? The Excel contents 1 function is similar, but it doesn't, I guess it just doesn't, it's less verbose, but it's pretty much the same elements. I guess it's got the with statements and so on. fact, it's identical. I'm not even sure why there's two functions here. Okay. Going the other way is Excel print, and that one's a little more rough than typically you might need to change it. What I suggest you do is you edit this Excel print function, and you modify it to it contains these three methods: print out and close and quit. So the idea of Excel print is you give it an APL array, and it sends that APL array to Excel, but then it goes on further and it sends that to the printer. So it's using Excel, in other words, as a printing go-between, or an intermediary for printing. If you didn't want to print directly from APL, you could send it to Excel, then print. Well, we don't want to do that. We just want to get the data into Excel. So what I suggest we do is go into Excel print, and modify it slightly. You see it's all well documented here. So what I want it to do, I do not want to call the print out method, so I'm just going to get rid of that line entirely. And I don't want to close either. I want to send something to Excel and leave it there so I can look at it in Excel, right? So I'm going to get rid of that line as well. And in fact, I don't want Excel to quit either. I'm going to get rid of that line. I'm just going to comment that out for now. So since I've made so many changes that I'm going to change the name of it to Excel display. That's my preferred name for it. Now let's look at a little bit at the logic in it here. Again, I probably should highlight it for you. What it does is it takes a matrix of information, and as the help said earlier, it said it could be numbers or characters. And it looks at the, it tries to calculate what is, I've got a rectangular array of information. What's the bottom right cell count in terms of Excel's logic going to be? Is it going to be A, B, C, D, E, F? How many rows? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's what this line here, far cell, it's how many rows, how many columns do I need? What's the address of the last cell in terms of a matrix approach? And frankly, I'm not quite sure if this is going to work on my computer. We'll find out, because I notice it doesn't put a colon in between. It's using an enclosed array logic, like A1 in one cell and D5 in another. Here's our OLE client Excel application thing again. We're going to add. Okay, here's another argument. Add null. That's what you discovered earlier there. When the argument is null, or I think quote would do as well, you get the sort of default behavior to add to creating a worksheet. Then we're going to set from range A1 to the far cell, and here's where I think I may have to modify that. Then we're going to set the value property. I suspect that should be changed to value 2, but we'll see what happens. Then it even goes on further, and it does this. It sets the font size, boldness, italic bits on. You may or may not want to do that. We'll leave it as it is for now. It also does a border around the information, and then finally closes. Okay, so let's try and see what happens. So I'll call my function display now. Let's just do something real simple. 5 reshape iota 25. And probably I should have done one more thing, and that is remove EX from the header, because it's local. I don't want the function to end and then EX to disappear. I want it to be there so I can still look at it from APL's point of view, because I'm probably going to have to do some debugging here. And also, by the way, the left argument is, again, optional debug, and it means, well, it's here, but it means if I really want to see the spreadsheet, I should use a value there. So let's do that. And okay, we got as far as creating Excel and creating a standard workbook with 3 worksheets, but nothing happened further. Why? Because, as I predicted, there would be a problem with value. So let's modify that. change it to value 2. See if that then works. So over in Excel, bingo, yeah, so it worked. And you can see that it's done some formatting. It changed it to bold, italic, it put that border around it. That was all that little bit of formatting stuff in the middle of the function there, right? You may or may not want that, of course. Okay, so I'll just display that again, just so you can see what happened there. So had we not had this little bit of stuff right here, it would have just been raw numbers with no formatting. And the border was another formatting extra. Okay, so now you've got a handy utility to send your matrix to Excel no matter what it is, and then you can go over there and look at it and modify it further, put some nice decorations on it, etc., etc. Okay, any questions on that? So those are two tools, or several tools that Dyalog gives you, and it's just a matter of you creating your own modified version. I've seen people develop a whole suite of functions based on these. You could get really elaborate. And there's a charting function, so you could take a vector of stock prices or something and create a chart in Excel using. Now that one again, you're gonna have to highly modify it. I suspect the same similar problems that we just encountered, and you'll eventually get a chart in Excel if that's your desired output. So the tools are there, but they're in raw form. Okay. So because I modified that function slightly, the EX object is still sitting there. So if I really wanted to go further and manipulate it in APL, now it's still sitting there, for me to do so. But instead, what I'm going to do is get rid of it, I guess. EX dot workbox 1 dot close, and then EX dot quit, which is what that print function would have done anyway.
What if you just quit without closing the workbook first?
Then I think it would prompt me.
Okay.
I hate being prompted, I guess. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about a few more tricks here in the last half hour or so that we got. I think I've mentioned some of these things already. There's this concept of activation. Which activation mean which spreadsheet and which rows and which columns are currently focused. There's a concept of selection and activation. You want to activate a worksheet and then select certain rows and columns. You can do that from APL if necessary. You can count the question might be what you've got an active once you activate a sheet, you can then refer to it as the active sheet object, and it would have a used range, and you can address the value, to property, and so on. What is the count of that? Well, the count would be the number of cells, in fact. So you would count the number of rows times the number of columns. That's the count, in case you want to know how big the used range is. Or you could do rows.count or columns.count to figure out each of those. I believe address, or there's also something called address. I forget what the property is called. There's a way of getting the actual address. It'll tell you from A1 to D5 or what have you. That can be a programmatic tool. And of course, value 2. Now that you've got an active sheet and a used range, you can get the value 2 property values for it. Or you can select a more specific range if you put, A1 through D5, etc. Anyway, what I'm getting at is used range is tricky because, as we've seen, it's affected by what the user does or you do with the spreadsheet. Even if you erase things, it might still consider it used. You used the term dirty, I think. What about multiple ranges and so on? Well, you can have some options like this. You can have one single cell. That's possible. You can have a range of cells like A1 through C3. That's good. Or you can actually, I believe you can do this. You can get away with this. You can have multiple ranges inside the range specification. So from A1 to C3 is one block, and then from D1 to D4 is another block. And that should come back to you as 2 APL arrays, which you can manipulate separately if you want. Okay, then I mentioned, I think it was an hour ago or so, about something called named ranges. that one is very handy. Let's do a demonstration of that one. Why don't I just invoke my function now, and it'll create an Excel object for me, except now it doesn't work for some reason.
Close the form.
Well, this function should have opened it again.
But the object still exists. You close it, but the object is still there.
That's, yeah, okay. Let's see what happens here. All right, that looks better. Okay, so we've got ex dot w workbooks 1 dot sheets 1, I guess, dot value 2. That
You need to specify the range.
yeah, you're right.
Use
Thank you.
API.
Use range, for example. Yeah. Now that's interesting. Why did it fill? I don't know why it filled the 6th row with nulls. That's weird. Okay, named ranges. Here's the thing. You can go to Excel. This is one way to do it. You could go to Excel and say, I want these. This 3 by 3 array here to have a certain name. I'm going to go over here. See, watch when I roll my mouse. When I roll the mouse over that thing, you see what it says there? It says name box. That little input area. It's called the name box. So I'm gonna give that a name. I'm gonna call it RNG1. Let's make it capital letter, I guess. G1. Return. So now that set of cells has a name. And so if I click on different cells, that's B1, that's B2, that's A4. But if I again highlight these cells, it knows that as range 1. That's what Excel understands to be a certain range. So now I can go over here to APL and I can say, give me from workbook 1, sheets 1, range, and to be honest, I forget the syntax. It looks like it needs to be in the brackets with enclosed as well. So bracket enclose RNG1 value 2. Nope, that's not right.
Like a name range or something, or it's just range?
Oh, I know what it says. No, it's enclosed.
Could you just try the properties?
No.
Value 2.
Okay, let me consult. Let's see.
It's an extra.
Oh, I see. Okay, so the range, the named range. That's it. The named range is not a property of the worksheet.
It's an active sheet.
It's a property of the either the active sheet, or I believe it's a property of the workbook. So let's see what happens if I just remove sheets 1. Nope, that's not right either. Because over here you can see later down I've got workbooks 1.names.item 1. This one, names. Now there is a name. There is one account in the names list, and, but for some reason It's not available for to APL. I don't know why this isn't working, sorry. Let's try it the other way around then as per the notes. What I do in the notes here is I say, let's set a range. Maybe I should try what it says in the notes there first, Excel.ActiveSheet. Active sheet is something, you have to activate a sheet to have an
That's
active
right,
not
sheet.
Excel.
It's called
Yes.
EX.
Oh, sorry, that's another problem too, isn't it? Okay, that does seem to work, yeah. But first I need to set it up, I guess, range from EPL's point of view. So let's pick a different range, I guess, since let's say A3 to C5. Dot name. That one's good. Yeah. Let's call that. No.
Shouldn't be closed.
It was enclosed, yeah.
Name.
Oh, sorry, the name itself needs to be closed? Yeah, right. No? I swear when I build these notes it works.
I think you're missing a quote.
Also, name's not enclosed.
Which name is not?
On the right, the range 2, there was no enclosure.
In the notes, yeah. No, there isn't.
Yeah, so that should.
That's what I tried earlier, and that didn't work. No, it's just active sheet, I think. It just doesn't like that yet. Let's try workbooks 1 again. Okay. Sorry, I'll have to play around with that a bit more to demonstrate that. I guess it does. It's not working very well. Anyway, I think it'll work if I start from scratch. Typically, you start from scratch and just follow through in the notes as I've done here. But for some reason, maybe the way that that EX object got created from inside that function it's different somehow than doing it from a raw point of view in the session. But anyway, the way it should work, and I think it does work, but not right now, is you can give a name to a range. You specify the range, and then you set its name property to a certain string, and then you can refer to that string instead of the actual letters of the and numbers of the cells themselves. You can reassign them or just read them. Once you've set up a bunch of these names, named ranges, there should be a property in the workbook's object called the names property, and it'll have a certain count according to how many names you've opened. And you could get each name by referring again to item. You could put names bracket 1 bracket or item 1 in brackets and then dot name. So it's either this way or the other way. And you could do this kind of logic to figure out all the names in one go and display the value 2 property. So that I'm pretty sure that worked when I set up these notes the other day, but I'm not sure why it's not working now. You could even go so far as to have multiple ranges that, like I said, they span more than just a rectangular array, like several rectangular arrays in a spreadsheet if you really wanted to get that complicated. But then you get into you might want to experiment with this. What is it that you hand that if you got like a set of cells here and another set here, from APL's point of view, what do you give it? You can give it a 2-cell array like this, I think. So 3 by 2 here and a 3 by 2 here. If you try to give it one simple array, so in other words a 3 by 4, I guess that would be, I believe it doesn't quite handle that very well. Just like the same problem we saw with a 5 by 5 versus a vector. There's also something called the areas property, collection object rather, and it has a count and value. So there's several options to play around with there, but they're probably not that important. Let's move on to a couple of quick other things. Some of you want to use Word. Well, on the stick there is an example of using that, I believe. I've got that bundled up sort of in a workspace, so let me just get that going here quickly. I'm just going to abandon all of this and say load in the workspace here. In that workspace, I've got a few simple functions that I've created. And one of them is this one, create doc. This is an example of using the same techniques we've learned already, but for Word instead of Excel. And you might ask, where did I get this code? I didn't actually sort of create it myself. What I did was I went to the internet, I Googled, you know, Word, VBA, programming, etc. And up came some rather extensive VBA code, Visual Basic code. And I simply adopted that code into APL. So it's almost, you know, line by line from what I got from Google. So basically, here's the same idea. You're creating an object, an OLE client object again, but in this case, it's Word application instead of Excel. You could make it visible or not. There's something called the window state. I don't know what that is. And apparently, in Word, the equivalent of a workbook is something called a document. So it's document.add is the method to create a new document. And it's you set that to be the active document. I guess is a shorthand that's available to you. And inside a document, you've got something called a range, which is defined by the active document. And there's a subunit called paragraphs. And then I guess paragraphs is a collection object. So you've got item 1, item 2, item 3, and so on. So you can create a range object. The equivalent, what we call a range object in Excel. I think of it the same way, but it's a paragraph instead of a bunch of cells. And now we're going to, within that particular range object, fiddle around with its properties. The font, we're setting the font size to 26. We're setting bold, italic, on. Here we're setting it back to 11. I don't know what I was doing here. We're going to insert some text. So the right argument to my function is a bit of text. And here I'm calling a method, I guess, called insert after, and I'm handing it the argument, which is my text. And then there's another method here that says insert paragraph after. I think that basically means it takes the text, creates a paragraph, and then it does a new line or something like that afterwards. Again, I can't remember doing this. It was a couple of years ago probably I did this, and I haven't used it. And then, so that's all within this with statement here. And we, so I guess what we do is we do that, I'm not sure how many times we do it. It looks like just one. Here we're inserting another piece of text called, you know, just my own creation. I guess when was the report created? I stick in a year, month, day. This is again another method, I guess, and the argument generates today's date, I suppose, and time, and then I end the function. So we could try it. I'm not sure if it'll work. I haven't tried it lately. Okay, what I've actually got it doing here, I've got it, I'm saying set the visible property, delay 5 seconds so we can actually see it, and then call the quit method to quit. And then expunge the actual object. So it just pops it up. It should just pop it up on the screen and then disappear. So do I have any text in here? I don't know. Not really. So that's going to be my text, just a simple vector, I guess. So create doc. Let's see what happens here.
It was in the background when you closed it.
Oh yeah? So you think it worked and then disappeared?
Yeah, it would work, but
Didn't get focus.
Ah, okay. So there's another property I guess I didn't think of or something. Yeah. Okay, let me try it again, and I'll try and grab it this time.
it didn't make a new.
Yeah, there we go. It actually stuck it right at the top there, and it disappeared. Okay, so there we go. So that's a very stupid and simple example, but you could modify it. We also have a few other simple functions here. PowerPoint, if you had a PowerPoint presentation that you wanted to, for some stupid reason, drive from APL, you could do that. So you call the PowerPoint application as an OLE client, and you activate it, whatever that means. The file name, I guess, is the argument here. You open the file name. Now this would have to be a PowerPoint that drives itself. You know, you can have automatic forwarding of the slides each time. I believe it would have to. Maybe there's a way to do that from APO. I didn't investigate that. There probably is. But this one, you would just do a simple PowerPoint that drives itself, and then again I delay and quit. So that's another simple example. What else do I have here? A PDF. Now here's something that's not Microsoft, but you might want to try this one. It's interesting. If you don't have it on your computer already, you can search around and you can find something called the Adobe Acrobat Control for ActiveX. So it's basically this is a little different than OLE client, OLE server. OCX class is a streamlined version of the things we've been talking about. So you can find these things out there on the web. You install it on your computer, and it becomes one of these objects that APL can talk to if that's what you want to do with it.
The difference is perhaps also that you can embed this in an APL form.
When I say streamlined, I mean it has no envelope. You have to create a wrapper for it. So yeah,
So you can make it appear in your own applications.
Exactly, precisely. You may have a GUI application already, and you just want to embed this into it. That's precisely what these things are for. Thank you.
To do this with charts.
Yeah. That would be a good example too. If you had a standalone charting application, you can embed that into your APL application using a tool like this. Yeah. So so actually, what I do is I create an APL form. We saw that very early on, and I give it the name Adobe PDF Reader, and I set its state to 2, which I think means maximized. And then I create what's called the Adobe PDF object within that form, and that becomes the container for this reader utility, this OCX utility. And then I invoke a method using quad enqueue. And the method is called load file, and the file name is the argument. And it should just load that PDF. So it's a way of showing a PDF to the user without using Adobe Acrobat.
So the Adobe PDF, you create the object in the first line? I was wondering about that.
It's
So
what you're creating. What you're doing is creating a link between APL and this thing called an OCX object.
Yeah. So the first line creates the. I'm just following the steps.
Go ahead. Yeah.
First line creates the Adobe PDF class or something, and then
it's not quite the full-blown Adobe Acrobat. It's a utility that you can embed in other applications to read PDFs.
So the third line, I'm saying how the third line depends on the first line.
It does. Yeah.
So it's
the same name. Yeah.
Okay, so you create that, whatever object you create on the first line, you specify that as your first parameter to apply WC in the third line? That's how that is?
Yeah, I think this name right here could have been anything.
But the one to the right.
But this one definitely has to correspond to that, yes.
So you're specifying it.
So actually, if you have an application, you will at some point make this first object, line 1,
Yeah.
And then you can reuse this object as
Yeah.
long as your session is
That's
alive.
exactly what we're doing. We're
Yes,
just-
so
we-
you can, each time you open a form, you can just make a new f-dot something
Yeah.
Use quantWC.
and make it from this object. That's actually the thing, but it's still a NC9
Yeah,
type of object.
Yeah, I guess, again, another way to look at where, you know, APL comes with certain objects already, a form object, buttons,
But this is-
menus,
this is-
so you're adding to that list, sort
So
of.
you're adding to that list, and
Yeah.
it knows to take from that, the first line, the one you just created with this OCX thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty handy. Where were we? You want me to leave that in for a moment? You're gonna-
There you go. Right here.
it's on the stick.
Oh, it's on the stick?
This
Okay, then I
workspace
need
is
to-
on the stick.
Oh,
Yeah.
that one's on there. Okay.
You don't need to write this down. What else? PowerPoint, Word, and what happened to my notes? Okay, now that I closed Word, my notes disappeared. So I'm gonna go over and find those again. One of the hazards.
I guess it just reused it. I guess you could make another.
Yeah, that's the business of instances, running instances versus ones that are already available and so on. This is one that I just discovered recently and was using with some customers of mine. Outlook is, of course, a Microsoft application. You could tell APL to tell Outlook to send a message. So the coding that I discussed, again, I just went to the web and I typed in, Outlook, VBA, send message or something like that. It came back with something sort of like this. So I just coded it into APL. So here's the OLE client called Outlook.application. And I don't know what these things mean, but again, I just borrowed it. And what I discovered was you basically you're handed three objects: the to, who's it to, and the email address or addresses, the subject, the text string, and the body of the message. So your argument is those three things, and you're setting the object, the Outlook object subject here, the to object here, the body here, and then you invoke what's called the send method. Not surprisingly. Then you do a log off and a quit. So it's pretty straightforward, right? And it works quite nicely. Okay. The rest of the notes on this, until we get to the Excel part, are just sort of little bit fuzzy details, things that I'm fuzzy on, and if you really want to know, understand this fully, you need to go back to the APL Dyalog APL interface guide. So I've pulled out some excerpts from that guide for you about such things like classes, and further down here there's bits about in-process versus out-of-process servers, ActiveX controls. This is the part about version 10 versus version 11, 12, etc. That's the page there and there. So very briefly, for those of you that are on the other side of the fence and are sitting in Excel and want to use APL, basically, here are the steps you go through. You start in APL and you develop an application. Like what is your application? You mind to tell us what it is?
Actually, if no one else is interested, I actually realized I already know how to do that.
You do?
Yeah, I've done it for others.
You've tried it? So you know
Yeah,
that-
you have to create a namespace that's an OLE server.
Right.
And then you expose all the methods and properties you need, and then you call it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you are now sitting. You are creating something that kind of looks like Excel. You're creating objects, an object with properties and methods. It's up to you to decide what those are and what they do, and then back over here in Excel, you call your object, which happens to be an APL object, and it's the same. But it's the same thing again. You've got properties and methods that you manipulate. So yeah, you create a namespace, you register it. There's a process for what's called exporting it. Then you create your spreadsheet. This is an example of one that I've done for a client where They wanted to enter stock prices, like they wanted to get time series information, the SP 500 and exchange rates and so on from a database. They wanted to set a time frame from 1990 to 1999 or whatever. And this button, when they hit this button in Excel, what it did was it went to their APL application on their network, got the data for those series and that time frame, pulled that data back into Excel, and then simply displayed it further down here. Very simple, but it took a fair amount of doing. But on the other side, I have got this APL workspace that basically what I'm doing is I'm in the Visual Basic code. I'm picking up the information that is in these boxes and tick boxes over here and so on. I'm sending all of that information to APL. APL gets it and says, okay, I want SP 500, I want the exchange rate for this country, and I want this time frame. It goes to the database, gets the data, it's all done in APL, and then it throws that back to Excel. And then Excel, there's a little bit more work that Excel has to do on this side to format the data, put the column headings nicely here, and the data here, format the dates, and so on. So you can imagine all those steps based on what we've talked about today. And it's, that's kind of what it looks like at the end there. Now Dyalog has a built-in tool that you'll see. It's called the loan example. It's in that same folder that we found the Ole Auto workspace in. You could start with that one if you really wanted to explore this. So it sounds like we don't really need to go into the details of that. There are some tricks to it. You can't export dyadic functions easily. And there's a few other little tricks and so on that you have to adhere to. Because we in the APL world, understand the world in a certain way, whereas in the non-APL world, they don't quite understand the concept of dyadic function, for example, or an enclosed array, for that matter. So that's what you're dealing with, is such differences. Finally, another one that I have used to advantage with clients is this one. Have any of you played around with databases reading databases from APL? This is very similar to what we've been talking about. Suppose you have a Microsoft Access database, and I've given you one on the stick here, and if you have access, you'll have it already. There's a function in that Ole Auto workspace. If I will load that up again, called SQL. And it calls a client object called the DAO DB engine. It's kind of a somewhat primitive database query tool. Well, more than query, you can read and write to a database. So in other words, when I say database, I'm talking SQL type of higher relational database, Access, and I'm not sure what else. There's a few others in that class. So similar to what we've done before, we create the client object. We then invoke a method. In this case, it's called open database, and we give it the database name. We then invoke another method called the record set, open record set, and the query would be a standard SQL statement. So, select star from country whatever for dates whatever, etc. It's various. If you're familiar with SQL, you know what I'm talking about. And then, so what happens is APL hands that query off to the database. The database comes back, and you invoke yet another method called getRows. You have to give it how many rows do you want back. You could do it one at a time, or you could do all of them, or a fixed number. If you do 999, if you've only got 100 rows, it'll come back with 100 rows, records rather. So this is for record-oriented database reading and writing. So that's a standard that all that function does is reading records from a database. So it's very similar to what we've talked about. It's just different methods, different object names, but the logic is identical to what we've talked about. So I hope you can use that to your advantage. I've used it with my client. We've created a couple of different Access databases. One contains they've got financial market information. So they've got, S&P 500. They've got some descriptive information that goes with that time series, what the data source was, what the start date, end date, and for frequency, and so on. So you can I can generate queries on just give me the monthly time series for the S&P 500 from this month to this month, and only from certain country, or certain series from certain countries and so on. So it's quite nice that you can, from APL, you can drive all of that as long as you get the database in a nice sort of simple table with standard names that you can refer to within APL. So that's basically how I do that. Any questions? Okay, I'll be around for the duration of the conference. If you want to try any of this out and have any questions that come up, I'm always available. So I thank you for your attention, and good luck.